All right. My name is Will. I coach debate here at Michigan State University, and I have a little PowerPoint that you can follow along with. Don't freak out if I go too fast. You can just raise your hand and we'll move it back. But you don't need to write down every single word. It's more important to me that the concepts make sense. So, no one who is in high school wants to hear some old guy kind of talk about their past, so I'll keep this brief. But normally I would not, in front of a lecture, wear a t-shirt like this. But this t-shirt is a t-shirt that comes from the first Spartan Debate Institute, which started 25 years ago today. And I kind of thought that today was a bit of an anniversary, a bit commemorative, so I thought that I would don the t-shirt. And there's many boring stories I could tell over 25 years at the Spartan Debate Institute, but I will only say two things about this shirt and about 25 years at the camp. The first thing I'll say is that I'm very proud that this shirt still fits. And secondly, I will say that I'm proud that the camp has always at least tried to have an enthusiasm that centers around your questions, your inquiries, and kind of what you want to talk about. To that end, you can ask me about really anything that you would like to ask me about. The design from the camp directors is to kind of give you an introduction to the packet materials, because many of you will be debating in the next few days about the items that are in the pre-prepared packet. That said, if you want to ask me about Baudrillard or hyper-reality or whether or not we're all really here, by the way, we all are really here, okay, then I'll be happy to kind of answer your questions on any subject, and over the course of the camp, we'll have many after labs, and we'll kind of talk about more than just the packet. But today is about kind of helping you get through the next few days. So I'm kind of curious about whatever runs through your mind. Don't be afraid to participate. That said, instead of kind of starting with a long explanation, I'm going to start with a skit. What's your name? Jerry. Jerry, could you stand up? What's your name? Ryan. Ryan. I'm gathering you're from Oklahoma.
Yes, sir.
All right, where are you from?
California.
California. All right. So, I want you all to envision, okay, that all of you are in line to get into whatever is behind this door, all right? And in reality, what's beyond that door is not terribly exciting. But in hyper-reality, what is behind that door is the awesomest stuff that you could possibly imagine. It is a club filled with the cool celebrities, like not Ryan Seacrest, like the good celebrities, okay? All right? It has like 250 Pokemon are like on the other side of that door, all right? Deflategate is over, okay? All right? Like it is a utopia beyond that door, all right? And Grace tries to come in, and I just let Grace walk in, and Catherine tries to come in, and I just let all of you kind of walk in. And then these two gentlemen, your name again? Jerry. Jerry, say hi to the group.
Hi.
And
Ryan.
And Ryan, they approach, and they would like their 250 Pokemon, okay? So please come forward, gentlemen. And I say no. I say stop, all right? And what would Ryan or Jerry ask? Why can't we come in, all right? All right? And the answer that I provide as the person that is the gatekeeper, that is the bouncer, all right, is to say, I can't tell you why. But the rest of you, please keep coming in. Oh, that's great back there. You all want to come in. Yeah, please, no, gentlemen, no, thank you. All right? And so this effect is an analogy that I'm going to draw upon to begin to explain some of the core themes of the packet. Let's thank Ryan and Jerry, and they will be allowed access later on. So, instead of it being Ryan and Jerry, imagine in this example that you are a Chinese investor, and what rests on the other side of the door is not Pokemon and great celebrities minus Ryan Seacrest, but instead, okay, is the largest marketplace in the world. which is American consumers. The United States of America is not the most heavily populated country in the world, but it is the greatest marketplace to enter because Americans, A, have so much money, and B, they will buy anything. Think about the garbage that Americans buy on Amazon Prime, okay? You can get anything, all right? So you want, all right, if you're Jerry and Ryan, access to the United States marketplace. And here the United States, okay, is letting in everybody else, but the United States is serving as a bouncer that won't let Ryan and Jerry in and won't entirely tell Ryan and Jerry why they are not allowed in. So how does that make China feel? Well, China thinks that it might have something to do with race or ethnicity or rivalry. China is frustrated financially by their lack of access to the United States marketplace. I don't want to oversell this. There are certainly Chinese investors in the United States, but China gets stopped at the door by the bouncer a lot more often. Their projects are reviewed before they are allowed to get in. This is not the same for Canada. It's not the same for the UK. So you tell me, I'll pose a question to you. If you were a Chinese investor, if you were in this analogy, Ryan or Jerry, what would you do? How would that make you feel? How would you react? What consequence might that have? Go ahead, anyone can contribute. What's your name?
Iowa.
Say it again?
Iowa.
Iowa? Where are you from, Iowa?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, the great state of Wisconsin. Okay, all right.
I wouldn't let the US.
Loud for everyone.
I wouldn't let the US have any hesitancy.
Okay, so the United States, so Isla's answer, Isla from Wisconsin said that China might respond in kind, okay, or respond in turn, and they might not allow the United States through those hypothetical doors back there. That it creates a bouncer effect in reverse. Who has a different answer? Go ahead. What's your name?
I'm Shaylee.
Shaylee from?
Texas.
Texas? Okay, great. Go ahead.
And, well, okay, if I was like a private investor,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have enough power, so I'd probably walk away while I still could.
Okay.
But if I was the state, I might try to take it to a higher level and try to create a change in the policy.
All right, so you might lobby above the bouncer's head, like the owner of the club. Okay, and you might say, hey, change this policy. Okay, that's an interesting answer. What's your name?
Richard.
Richard, where are you from?
Also Texas.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
I'll just go over to the club across the street.
Yeah, all right, so Richard says I'd go to the club across the street and play the analogy out with me. What might that be?
I go trade with Taiwan or India.
Okay, I can think of better markets than Taiwan or India. Like I might go to the EU or huge other spenders. And so one of the ramifications that it has was correctly identified, which is that China kind of puts up its own barriers, all right? But also the United States potentially loses business, all right, because they're not allowing Chinese investors to kind of come in, and that business, which could create jobs or have a variety of effects, might go somewhere else. Go ahead. You could just torch the place? Okay, well, be careful here. All right, I'm not looking for more answers, and they're starting to get weird. All right, so yeah. No. Yeah. E. All right. So, the analogy that I'm talking about is called SIPI, which is an acronym that SIPI, all right, and it's an acronym which stands for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It's a real committee that was set up in the 1970s under the Ford administration. It wasn't used very much until much later. And CFIUS's job is to review any investment that might come into the United States if that investment were to pose a risk to national security. specifically CFIUS, which is a government organization. It involves members of a variety of different parts of the United States government, like the Homeland Security, the Department of Treasury is involved, a variety of different players. Specifically, they tend to look into what's called M&A, which is part of our acronym SOUP for the morning, right? Mergers and acquisitions, where Jerry and Ryan in this example aren't just looking to invest some money in an American company, they're looking to either acquire the American company or to acquire enough of it so it can merge with a Chinese company. You've probably seen a movie or a TV show where they've talked about hostile takeovers. Most takeovers aren't hostile. Most of the time a Chinese investor will come to an American company and say, hey, we would like to buy the Spartan Debate Institute. What would it cost for us to purchase the Spartan Debate Institute? And they could purchase the Spartan Debate Institute if CFIUS said it was okay. CFIUS is not solely targeted at China. CFIUS has the power to review any foreign investment. But in practice, over 50% of the cases that CFIUS reviews are from Chinese investors. Go ahead.
What's the difference between
Loud.
What's the difference between CFIUS and the Securities Exchange Commission?
So his question is, what's the difference between CFIUS and the Security and Exchange Commission? All right. Some of you might know a little bit about the Security and Exchange Commission from last year's topic. I would say the Security and Exchange Commission is usually investigating behavior where inside the United States or domestically there are mergers and acquisitions and investments. And CFIUS has a charge which deals more with foreign investors. In theory, the Security and Exchange Commission could review that as well, but in practice, CFIUS is charged with foreign investment, and specifically foreign investments that could pose a national security risk. All right? Yeah, go ahead. Loud.
What kind of foreign investments could pose a national security risk?
So, all right. The question, what's your name?
Max.
The question from Max is, what kind of investments could pose a national security risk? And that's something that irritates China to the largest degree. Remember, I didn't just bounce Ryan and Jerry from the club. When they asked why they weren't allowed to come in, they weren't given a very large answer. So one of China's frustrations is they know that CFIUS can say, you can't come in, and they know it's about national security, but they don't really know what companies the United States is looking to protect. And they fear that the United States is abusing the ability to review foreign investment and saying that kind of anything constitutes a national security risk. Max, I'll answer your question more specifically in a moment when I talk about high-profile cases that give some examples. But if you're China, you're asking yourself the same question and you're frustrated. What is it that I'm not allowed to do? China understands that not all foreign investment is going to be allowed. China understands that if they try to acquire a U.S. company that built American tanks, that would be vetoed, all right? And China would veto that in reverse. But, all right, you kind of want to know the rules of the road, if that makes sense. All right, great question, Max. All right, so CFIUS is the U.S. version of reviews for national security. And China has their own CFIUS, and they refer to it as NSR, or National Security Review. So as we continue to learn our acronym SOUP, know that it's somewhat confusing because conceptually all of this is National Security Review, but when you make a reference to NSR, you're referring to China's bouncer, and when you're referencing CFIUS, you're referring to the United States' bouncer. All right? More on that as we continue. So, CFIUS has denied or been involved in the process of reviewing 3 very major cases. All of these are outlined in greater detail in your glossary, but I'll talk about each of them briefly now. CNOOC is a Chinese national oil company. The exact acronym isn't all that important. And they were trying to purchase an American oil company, and CFIUS got involved and said, hold on, we're not sure that we want a Chinese company owning a market that is as powerful and as important as oil production in the United States. This was very controversial because it wasn't purely a national security issue, and by national security I mean like a risk of some sort of threat to the American military or threat on U.S. soil in a physical sense. Instead, it was more of a threat in China's eyes to economic security, where the United States might economically prefer to have American companies controlling oil, but nonetheless, that kind of was reviewed and created a little bit of a problem. The Rawls case, which I'll kind of reference next, was an interesting case where a Chinese company wanted to buy a wind farm, like those really ugly wind farms that you see kind of when you're driving about. And there was no problem with buying the wind farm, except it was very close to a U.S. naval base. And so President Obama stepped in and said, we would like to review this purchase. You're not allowed to be so close to a naval base. And that created a lot of frustration on the part of China. I don't know how to pronounce that in correct Chinese. Someone who speaks Chinese can tell me. Go ahead. Hawaii? What's that?
Huawei.
Okay. Say it for everyone. Someone over here said it very well.
Huawei.
Huawei. Okay, great. Are you guessing or do you know?
No, like I know the company.
You know the company. What? What's your name?
Michael.
Michael knows the Huawei company. All right. Way to go. All right. What can you tell us about Huawei?
They make phones.
All right, they make a variety of forms of technology, and there was a concern that if they merged and purchased American companies, that they would have too much control of technology and various assets that could be useful to the United States, so they were reviewed by CFIUS. Not all CFIUS reviews are about China, but there's very few examples that you could find that aren't. So in theory, the bouncer reviews everyone. In practice, the bouncer has really only reviewed a non-Chinese case that was high profile in one instance, and that is when some ports, like think of shipping and like a harbor, some ports were going to be purchased by the United Arab Emirates, by a company called Dubai World Ports, and they were going to be purchased in and around New York City. It was relatively close to after 9/11, and the United States was worried about port security, so they used CFIUS in order to review Dubai Port's ability to own American harbors and ports. That example is useful to know about, but that example is somewhat dated, and since then most of the review is from China. Now, when I asked you to think about the reactions that China could make, no one thought of the idea of voluntary review. So in this instance, if Jerry and Ryan would like to get into the club, Jerry and Ryan can come up to the bouncer, CFIUS, and say, hey, can I come in? Or they can submit in advance an application to me saying, we don't think we have any national security problems, but if we do, could you let us know in advance so that we don't have to drive all the way to the club? And so many Chinese companies are beginning to voluntarily have their mergers and acquisitions and investments reviewed by CFIUS so that they can find out in advance whether or not their project will be approved. You do not want to go through the process of wasting your time and your money starting to acquire another company if it's going to get shut down, just like you don't want to drive to the great club and find out that you're not allowed in. CFIUS, however, is more frustrating to China because of the great many instances of involuntary review, where China does begin the process and is surprised to find out that the company involved has been deemed a national security risk. Go ahead. Loud.
Okay, so are all
Oh, there's two people. All right, go ahead.
oh,
Someone's talking. Go ahead. Yeah.
all right.
Okay, so the question is, what's your name? Zach asks, are all China investments prohibited? In fact, most Chinese investments are not even reviewed, okay? But because some are, it makes a lot of Chinese investors think that any could be. And then you had a question as well.
Yes, how do we know the people who are involved with CBS making decisions are qualified?
How do we know that the people who are involved in CFIUS are qualified to make their decisions? Well, maybe some in China would argue that they aren't. But these are people that hold very high-profile positions in the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Treasury. I mean, if you were to look at their resume, they would appear to be qualified. The real question that China asks, though, is are they biased towards China? Do they think that China is more of a risk than China really might be? Does that make sense? Yeah. Loud.
When there's when the companies do it voluntarily,
Yeah.
and it's recipients, are they more likely to be accepted?
Ooh, great question. What's your name?
Allison?
Allison, that's a great question. If China voluntarily submits, and China's not one whole thing, so if a Chinese company voluntarily submits, are they more likely to be approved? The statistics would say yes, but not because they're safer or because they agreed to volunteer, but one would probably not volunteer if one thought that a problem would kind of emerge. Does that make sense? So that is kind of a weird selection bias. Go ahead, what's your name? Okay.
If most investments are being reviewed,
Yeah.
that's substantial.
Okay, so that's a great question. Kriti, that's it, right? All right. So Kriti asks, if most investments aren't reviewed, how substantial is it? Okay? And this is kind of an intriguing question. In like a mathematical sense, it's not all that substantial yet, but we don't know how much Chinese investment has been lost because people don't even want to bother with the bouncer. Does that make sense? And so it's potentially very significant and even more significant going forward. The United States is going to review 3 major cases this year as it relates to China, and you want to say that the symbol is very, very significant. Is there another question? Go ahead.
Have there been any banned project companies that when they go to the election, the economy
Has the United States ever reversed course? No, because once you break up with someone, it's hard to get back together. You know what I mean? You know, yeah. Go ahead.
If the U.S. knows that CFIUS, or if the U.S. knows that China is so frustrated with CFIUS, then why does it continue with this renewal?
Okay. Okay, so the question is, if the United States knows that China is, frustrated, why does the United States keep doing it? And the answer is that there are, I think, some in the United States federal government that are very nervous about 2 things. What if China really does pose a national security threat through spies, etc.? And then I think that there are some in the United States government that are worried that China might pose an economic threat, all right? And they would like the flexibility of pinning that on national security when in reality it's probably not. Go ahead.
So why Japan keep even trying if they know that it's going to be biased towards it?
Okay, so why does China keep trying? What's your name? You said Japan, but I understood where you're coming from. Yeah, what's your name? All right, Jason. So Jason asks, why do they keep trying? Okay, so because remember, on the other side of this door is 250 Pokemon and all this other. The American market is very, very profitable. So economically, it's worth it to try, especially since a lot of the American review process doesn't say no to China. So they take their chances because most people get in, but not all. Go ahead.
What's the United States advantage by not telling China?
Okay, so why does the United States not tell? Because, all right, let's draw another analogy, okay? Let's say they ask me as the bouncer, why won't you let me in? And I give them a very detailed description why I won't let them in. If they're really a national security threat, then the next time that they'll come, they can adjust to the information that I've given them. Does that make sense? And so you're dealing with a bunch of people in the United States government that are very paranoid, all right, or very nervous about China being a national security threat. So they want to give away as much information as possible, all right? It's kind of like the New England Patriots all right, they want everyone else's playbook, all right, but they don't want you to know theirs. Does that make sense? All right? So the United States does not want to reveal, okay, what it's looking for, all right? Because as soon as you know what the United States is looking for, then you've revealed your playbook, all right? We'll take two more and we got to keep moving. Go ahead. Great question. Yeah.
Many Chinese companies that try to get into the news market but have been shut down as if have anything still coming here kind of secretly? Like, can this still operate?
Oh, well, I guess his question was if any of them kind of gotten in illegally. I guess we wouldn't 100% know, okay? All right? But no, usually when these mergers are denied, they take their business elsewhere, if that makes sense. All right, one last one right here. Go ahead.
Does the NSR act like CPS?
Oh, wow, okay, so I love that question. What's your name?
Maxine.
All right, Maxine, that's a great question. Does the NSR in China act like the United States? And the answer is not yet. But if the United States keeps it up, there's a lot of concern that not just China, but then other countries will be like, hey, the United States is protecting its market. We need to do the same. Does that make sense? All right. So that is all right. We're doing great. Okay. All right. So we haven't even gotten started. All right. And here we are. All right. So don't have any fear of asking questions. I don't even think I need to repeat that. We're doing well there. You can cheat during this lecture. Go to that website. Leaf through the 1AC, which is called the bit 1AC. More on that in a moment. And if you have questions that are unrelated, pose them to me. Pose them to me after the lecture ends, or to your instructors later on this afternoon. All of this is about you learning and knowing the files. I'll leave it there for 1 second in case people don't know where to locate any of these items, but I think we're pretty familiar. Okay, so now we're going to transition and talk a little bit about the U.S. election. That's what we call the political spectrum. And as you move to the left on the political spectrum, for reasons unknown to me, you're regarded as being more blue. And as you move to the right on the political spectrum, one is regarded as being more red. The color coding scheme doesn't matter all that much, but it will help as we begin to have a discussion about the U.S. election. What is that? And don't think before you answer on this one. Go ahead. It's an electoral college map. Who has more detail? It's the 2012 electoral college map, the most recent presidential election, where Governor Romney got 206 votes and President Obama got 332 electoral college votes. That is regarded, all right, as a pretty sizable victory, and that many elections have been far closer to that in recent history. Part of the reason that I bring it up is that look at the different colors, all right? The darker the blue is, all right, the wider the majority for the president, and the deeper the red is, the more difficult it is for the Democrats to succeed, and the easier it is for the conservative candidate, presumptively Donald Trump, will be to win. Who knows the reddest state? What state did Governor Romney do the best in? Texas is not right, although it is a pretty red state. No. He killed it in Utah, all right, and he killed it in Oklahoma. All right, those are the two reddest states. All right, and the bluest state in the last election were states like Hawaii, etc. All right, so go ahead.
Why is there a red square cut out of it?
Yeah. All right, so I don't want, and there's a, if you look up in Maine, all right, there's a blue one, because some states reserve the right to split up their electoral college votes. All right, so Maine has 4, I believe, and I think 3 went to President Obama, and the 4th also went to President Obama, but they had the right to split it up. It doesn't matter very much because one of the states that has the ability to split is Nebraska, and Nebraska will almost always vote Republican, I would say 100% in the near future. Maine is a bit more interesting, okay, and we could see a split in Maine, but if you're one of the like electoral map, you fill out your own map and you try to figure out who's going to win, Hillary or Donald or Bernie. Sorry, it's not going to be Bernie. It's not. I mean, the weird thing in Maine is kind of odd. All right, great. So let's kind of keep looking going forward. List me off some of the states that are most purple. All right, that's an expression that I didn't just make up. That mix in the middle between red and blue states. Go ahead. Florida is regarded as a purple state that could swing, and it sometimes goes Republican, it sometimes goes Democrat. Most famously, probably before many of you were born, in the 2000 election, it was decided by less than 600 total votes, and it was contested all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Go ahead. Ohio is regarded as another one of the famous purple states. Go ahead, right here.
Iowa.
Okay. I think I've usually seen Iowa on the list, but maybe a little bit lower. Go ahead. New Hampshire. Okay. We're doing well. You're right here. I'll take one more.
North Carolina.
North Carolina is a state that the Democrats are obviously targeting, that President Obama won once, but I believe he did not win twice. And when President Obama got involved in Hillary Clinton's campaign, he immediately started there. So, Donald Trump claims that he can win the general election, but Donald Trump is trying to win the general election by turning states that aren't classic purple states, but instead are what we call Rust Belt states, or at least that's the reference in some of the packet materials. And what that means is that Donald Trump is trying to appeal to voters in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, and say, you have lost your job. And many workers in those states have lost their jobs. And they're trying, the argument that Donald Trump is trying to make is to make America great again. And the argument that he's specifically trying to make is say, economically, I can help you get your job back, and that all of these trade deals that other candidates have done through the years have not benefited workers in Michigan, in Ohio, and Pennsylvania. This is very different than a campaign that Governor Romney ran in 2012, where Governor Romney probably wasn't as targeted in on those quote-unquote swing states and might have been targeted in on other swing states. Of course, they all try to win everywhere, but in reality, they look at polling data and they zero in, and Donald Trump is very much zeroing in on swinging or flipping states in the Midwest, like Wisconsin, etc., that all traditionally have gone blue. So, Trump's path to victory, all right, seems mathematically unrealistic, but Kirby is confused. How are you going to win, Donald Trump? Well, this map might be more instructional, and it repeats a little bit of what I was saying before. Here, this map is something that the Trump campaign would draw differently, where they would view a state like Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania as much more purple, and they are much more optimistic that they can appeal to voters in those states. And so, therefore, Kirby is not as confused. The point in all of this isn't to just show you maps. The point is that the negative will argue that economic engagement with China will be used by the Trump campaign to say, look at the Democrats, look at President Obama, look at his former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. They're trying to give our jobs away to the Chinese. They are going to cost you your jobs in Michigan, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in states where a lot of jobs have been lost. And I, in this example, Donald Trump, can make America great again. And I would not engage China in the way that you are engaging China. And the point isn't whether or not Donald Trump is correct. The point is whether or not the message that Donald Trump could gather from an affirmative plan that economically engaged China, whether or not that message could help him fare better in the election because that message would be appealing to voters in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Go ahead. Louder.
Wouldn't this stop work, like this argument stop working after November though?
Yes. Yes. I mean, do not run the elections, DA, after November unless weird things happen, okay? All right. But part of what we're doing today is to prepare you for the debates you're going to have this week. And this is definitely like strong dissent between now and November is the effect that the plan could have on the election, because China and economics are big deals in the election. Yeah. Loud.
What running the election, DA, means you also have to prove that Trump would be bad for America? Because if the fact
Well, you can run the election, DA, in a variety of ways. His question is, would you have to prove that Trump would be bad for America? First of all, there are some people that write that, okay, all right? Secondly, it doesn't have to be bad for just America. You could run a dissent impact about how Trump might be not advantageous for foreign policy on global warming, or foreign policy as it relates to his security policies in Asia, Europe, etc. Okay? So that's how that could go, yeah?
Would this DA only link to the economic and not the diplomatic part of the resolution?
Okay, so that, what's your name?
Serena?
Serena asks a great question. Would this disadvantage only link to the economic portion of the topic and not the diplomatic portion of the topic? My answer is yes and no. I think it would link to the diplomatic portion of the topic because in the real world, if the Democrats came out and really diplomatically engaged China, Donald Trump would almost certainly say that that's an example of weak foreign policy and that we need to have more bouncer effects because there is a national security issue. But I think the economic portion of the topic links even better because I think voters care more about their jobs and economic security than they care about diplomatic engagement with China. But that's, you know, the negative is welcome to argue whatever they would like. So, it is going to be Trump versus Hillary. I apologize to the gentleman with the Stanford shirt in front here. Economic engagement might not be popular with U.S. voters for two reasons. One is that economic engagement with China could be viewed as a job-stealing tactic. And secondly, a lot of American voters are concerned about China for all the reasons that have already been discussed. You don't have to say that those concerns are accurate, all right? You just need to say that the Trump campaign could kind of use that in order to help them succeed in the election. So it's not entirely about the truth. I suspect that most Chinese investors don't pose a threat to American national security. It's about the ability to spin a particular message. And these messages don't need to resonate in California because California is going to vote for Hillary. And they don't need to resonate in Oklahoma because Oklahoma is going to vote for Donald Trump. That's the reality. If you live in California or you live in Oklahoma, your vote will not change the election. In all likelihood, you could vote for Mickey Mouse and it would not make a difference, okay? But if you live in some of the states that were listed off, in a crazy twist, your vote has a more powerful effect on the terminal outcome of the election because those states tend to be up for grabs to a far larger degree. So, the other portion of the affirmative in the packet talks about bilateral investment treaties, or BITs. Our acronym soup continues. A bilateral investment treaty is, in short, the rules of the road for investors. Investors don't want to invest in another country where they don't know if the government will step in and say, hey, you're not allowed to invest here. There's a variety of different ways in which bilateral investment treaties iron out between two countries what our rules for investment will be. If there's a dispute, who resolves it? If the dispute is in a foreign country, is it resolved in the courts of a foreign country? If the dispute's in the United States, is it resolved in the United States? The U.S. has bilateral investment treaties with 47 other countries, maybe 48 now, and China has over 100. It is shocking that the two largest economies in the world, China and the United States do not have a bilateral investment treaty with one another. A bilateral investment treaty is a bit like this. Like, where is our relationship at as it relates to investment? Okay? And right now, until a bilateral investment treaty is finalized, it's complicated. Okay? And the United States needs to, arguably, according to the affirmative, make it less complicated. So when you're negotiating a bilateral investment treaty between two countries, in this case between the United States and China, what are the big questions that you want answered? Okay, number one, if there's a dispute, who resolves the dispute? All right, and the United States and China have already agreed, even though the United States and China don't have a bilateral investment treaty, they've already agreed that a quote-unquote third party, meaning like someone inside the World Trade Organization, would resolve a dispute if one side accused the other of violating the bilateral investment treaty. The second item that you want out of a bilateral investment treaty is to decrease the protection of each country's foreign investment. Or better put, fewer bouncers. The third item is what's called the negative list. And again, I encourage you to look at the glossary if any of these terms don't make sense. But a negative list is kind of interesting, and I'll draw an analogy. Suppose that you have an incredibly overbearing set of parents. Maybe this resonates with some of you. And you're thinking about all the different colleges that you might consider attending in the future. All right? And your parents want to sit down with you every single day and hear the list of colleges that you're interested in to either approve or disapprove. Okay? And then your parents have a whole set of colleges that they would like for you to consider. All right? And you say, okay, I'll sit down with you every day and we'll talk about your colleges and my colleges. All right? That could get to be pretty grating and pretty annoying. And so in negotiations, China came forth after a while with the United States and said, here are a series of colleges that I am not interested in going to. All right? We can talk about the rest of them. All right? That concept, it wasn't about colleges, but instead was about a negative list for foreign investment. Or better put, all right, China came to the table and said, all right, we will allow you to invest in every single one of our different industries. You can invest in our steel industry. You can invest in our auto industry. You can invest in our financial sector, except for the items on this list. So it wasn't an agreement in the sense of being a bilateral investment treaty, but it was a step which said, we are going to be relatively open, and we are going to tell you in advance where our bouncers will stand. In the status quo, the United States claims that China has a negative list that is 38 pages long. So there are 38 pages filled with industries that China would like to protect, which means to keep away from American investment. And the United States claims that they only have 8 such sectors. We don't really know how true all that is because people don't want to reveal their playbooks, but the United States is not lying when it says that China has a larger negative list or larger list of companies that it would like to protect from U.S. investors. Question, way in the back, nice and loud. Louder. So it's weird because they use, the U.S. says they have about 8 sectors, okay? Yeah. All right, go ahead.
How much does the negative list actually matter if SIPI is still wary about China investing in U.S.
Yeah, that's a great question. How much does the negative list matter if SIPI is still nervous about investment? All right, and the affirmative answer should be that until SIPI is to sort of change, which is what the affirmative is going to do, China won't be very interested in investing because they'll always be nervous that they'll get bounced at the door. Go ahead, Zach.
How is the app unique?
How is the app unique? That could mean a lot of things. I find it to be very lovely. Yeah. Loud. Oh. Yeah, so his question is, how does the affirmative solve? One of the difficult things, and if you're a little bit checked out or this lecture is kind of weird, one of the difficult things to remember on this topic is the affirmative can really only change American negotiating stances. It can't guarantee that China will say yes to anything. All right? So it's in the magical game of kind of pretending that the world should change, which is what the affirmative does. The United States might make a new offer to China, and China might say, we're not interested in it. The difference, however, is that China has been asking for some time for the United States to get rid of CFIUS, which is something the United States has not been willing to do. For some time, China has been asking to make CFIUS more transparent and to reveal their playbook, and the United States has not been willing to do that. So what would change this go-round, if I was affirmative, is that the United States is making concessions that the United States has been unwilling to make in the past. And hopefully that gesture would cause China to agree to kind of change their behavior or sign on to a treaty. Yeah?
If CFIUS is less of a national security concern, more of economic security?
Well, that's not what the U.S. says, but yeah.
What will make them, let's say if CFIUS is taken away, what will make them not just transfer the certain sectors which CFIUS was denying before, not just put it on the negative list?
Yeah.
And then...
So what will prevent CFIUS from not just pretending that everything is a national security risk?
No, CFIUS goes away and they just put everything that CFIUS is blocking on the negative list.
Well, the United States wouldn't agree, and China wouldn't agree to a treaty if there was a huge negative list. Like, the point of a treaty is to try to allow each other to invest with one another. So one could do that, but it wouldn't succeed in getting an investment treaty. And both the United States and China actually have members of their business communities that would really like a treaty to occur, because there's a lot of profit in the United States. Remember my Amazon Prime thing. But there's also, I don't know if you know, but there's like 1 billion plus people in China, so that's an attractive marketplace as well. Yeah.
Do bits have to be renewed or like?
Ooh, great question. Do bits need to be renewed? Okay. In theory, no. In practice, though, if Donald Trump were elected, he could probably have the influence to either end a bit or, really hurt it a lot. But it is a treaty, right? It's not just like a date. It's more like a wedding ring. Yeah.
So if there's not a bit now between China and the U.S.
There's not.
But
Yeah.
there is foreign direct investment.
There is investment. Yeah.
Then what sets the framework for current investment?
Nothing sets the framework for current investment. It's like dating in the wild, wild west. Like, you don't know what's going to happen, and at any moment, the United States or China could be like, "Hey, we're shutting down your investment," and that makes investors feel uncertain and less interested in investing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you said that the Chinese black negative list is 38 pages or something like that. Wouldn't that mean that
It's called the negative list, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the negative
Yeah.
list. Wouldn't that mean that the NSR isn't operating as effectively as U.S. CFIUS is if they have to make a list that large? And wouldn't that also mean that China is more willing to have U.S. companies investment in them rather than the other way around if they still gave so many options?
Can you say the second part? Doesn't that mean that China is more...
more willing to have U.S. companies invest since they provided so many options? They said, here are the 38 that you can't do.
So I haven't really talked about this yet, and tell me if I don't 100% answer your question. But a big difference, and so I'm going to try to bring you back if I've been all over the map. A big difference between China and the United States is something that are called SOEs, and I want you to jot this down. They're called state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises, which really means state-owned companies. So China, all right, because of everything that Maggie talked about, has sort of a mixed economy. It's very, very corporate in some ways, but it's run by a communist government, which means a lot of the businesses are actually owned in part or in whole by the government, okay? The United States doesn't have that, okay? At least in theory. And so the United States doesn't really have a company which is technically owned by the U.S. Congress or the Democratic Party or something like that. So that creates a different set of incentives. You are right that China is not using its security review as aggressively as the United States, But the real reason that China wants to have such a huge, long negative list is that there are certain state-owned government companies that they want to succeed. If those companies were to go down, it would be different than in the United States because the government would literally be failing as opposed to IBM failing. Does that make sense? Have I answered your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, let's keep moving. Y'all are doing great. Okay. So, this is what China wants. Less security review by the United States. More information about what the bouncer is thinking. They want to keep their negative list long. They want to protect all 38 pages. Or if they have to give away something in their 38 pages, they want to give away as little as possible. New England Patriots. All right? And they want fewer exceptions for state-owned enterprises. The United States is really actually pretty willing to let Chinese companies come into the U.S. They're not so willing to let Chinese government-owned properties come into the United States. If you really think that China's filled with spies, you're more worried about a Chinese government-owned business than a non-government-owned business. So the United States makes a lot of exceptions for state-owned enterprises, and China's not down with that. China wants to have as few exceptions as possible and as much investment as possible for SOEs, or state-owned enterprises. The United States and China have had meetings on the BIT, or the Bilateral Investment Treaty. 24 of them. The most recent on June 7th of this month. And they exchanged negative lists a few days before camp started. That's actually off by a little bit. There is a stated goal from the United States and China to try to complete an investment treaty by the end of the Obama administration, which is not in November, but the Obama administration technically went in January of 2017. And the reason is the Chinese government believes that the Obama administration would be more receptive to an investment treaty than either Hillary Clinton, and certainly more so than Donald Trump. So there's a real incentive to try to get this done. But, for those of you that have glanced at certain parts of the U.S. Constitution, what is the trick about the United States Senate and treaties? Anyone?
2/3.
Go ahead.
Like 2/3 of them have to.
Yeah, what's your name?
Malachi.
Malachi nailed this. 2/3 of the United States Senate, or 67 people, have to approve of a treaty. So even after President Obama and President Xi sign on to a bilateral investment treaty, it's not the law yet. In the United States, that has to be approved by the Senate. And 67 votes in the United States Senate is a lot. It's not impossible, because Republicans like businesses, all right? And it would be done by Obama, so that would help get some Democrat votes as well. But, you know, I don't know. If you watch the news, getting the U.S. Senate to agree on anything is pretty hard, and 67 votes is really difficult. So that's the complicating variable in completing a bilateral investment treaty. That's why some of the plan texts, if you were to cheat and look ahead, just have the United States Senate agree to the bilateral investment treaty. That's a big decision that you'll need to make in your first practice debate out of the packet. Do I want to leave it up to the United States Senate? Or as an affirmative, do I just want to fiat that the United States Senate will agree to a completed bilateral investment treaty? So, new thread key, all right? What are some of the big reasons that, well, look at the question on the board. What's more important to U.S.-China relations, economic engagement or military disagreements? I'll give everyone a chance to kind of think about their answer, and I'll call upon a few of you. Okay. Category 1, economic is more important. Category 2, military or human rights is more important. Raise your hand if you think economic relations are more important to the U.S.-China dynamic, okay? All right, put your hands down. Now raise your hand if you voted for column B, which is military, okay? Interesting, all right? Why did you vote for column B? Loud.
I figured like getting them to communicate would be like the support of the actual people of China, and so getting them to human rights.
All right, interesting, all right. So there's no right answer, and it's going to be debated about. The affirmative on this topic is often going to say economics are more important than other issues in the relationship with China, and the negative is going to point out that the affirmative is not enough, that it's insufficient because there's so many other fights which exist outside the realm of economics, or in the case of the packet, outside the realm of investment. Here is the argument that the affirmative needs to draw upon. The affirmative needs to draw upon an argument called interdependence. Interdependence. And it's, I'm sorry, the reason I made a glossary is there's so many new words as we start this topic. But interdependence argues that two countries tend to not get into conflict of any kind, military conflict, any conflict, if that conflict will cost them a whole bunch of profit. I'll say that again. Interdependence argues that economics comes first because conflicts don't happen if the conflicts would compromise profit. In the analogy at the beginning of the discussion, Ryan and Jerry and I won't get into too much of a disagreement because if I'm too much of a jerk or they're too much of a jerk, we'll lose all of the investment from another country. Some people believe that the reason that the United States has not gotten into a conflict over the South China Sea or over Taiwan, etc., is because the United States would lose access to 1 billion customers in China. Likewise, some people think that China has not flared up its relationship with the United States because they want all of the access to the U.S. market. In the packet, you'll be given a variety of different options, and I encourage you in your first practice debate to try out one of the options that you've never really studied before. Maybe for some of you, since it's a new topic, that could be all of it. But one of the advantages that the affirmative will argue in the packet will be argued by many affirmatives over the course of the topic, and that is that engagement builds the United States-China relationship. Well, there are 6 reasons that are available as to why the United States-China relationship is important. You would never have time in your first speech to read all 6 of them, but you might want to academically familiarize yourself with all of them. Let me say that there are way more than these 5 or 6 modules, etc. The first module argues that if the United States and China got along, specifically if they got along with an interdependent economic relationship, that they would never fight over the South China Seas. The Philippines and Vietnam might, but the United States would never get involved. Similarly, the second option is very kind of the same blueprint, that the United States would never get involved in a conflict over the East China Sea. You can check out a map. Maggie kind of did that already. And that tensions that might flare up between China and Japan would never escalate, never involve the United States, etc. Taiwan, or what's called the Republic of China in certain circles, the same argument, that tensions over the United States and China, which do exist on the question of Taiwan, would never get out of hand because of a strong economic relationship between the United States and China. So the first 3 are really about military security. The fourth one isn't. One of the arguments is that you want to have a good United States-China economic relationship because if you don't, it could have a huge effect on global living standards. China, and there's definitely some dispute about these statistics, but China had a goal of taking hundreds of millions of people who lived below the poverty line out of the poverty line through economic growth, or to raise the living standards of, for lack of a better phrase, about 800 million peasants who largely lived below the poverty line. China has statistics that say that they've done a great job with this. Some people question those statistics. But China and the United States are, again, the two largest economies in the world. And you want them to continue to have a good trading relationship, not just for the trading relationship with one another, but if either economy were to falter, it could have huge effects on development rates in other parts of the world. If China's economy were to falter, that would have an enormous impact on the rest of Asia. If the United States' economy would falter, that could have an enormous impact on the rest of the world. And there's some very interesting statistics that say that some of the poorest people in the world that live in South Asia or live in Africa are benefiting from a strong United States-China economic relationship because it's helping to raise everyone's global profits. Other people question those statistics, but an interesting argument is a global poverty, global living standards argument, which says we need to have a good relationship between the United States and China in order for there to be more income that's available to more people worldwide. Some people argue a completely different argument, which is that the United States and China are especially important players in global discussions about climate change. That the United States is this highly developed economy which burns a lot of fossil fuels. And if the United States tells a whole bunch of the world, go ahead and burn fossil fuels, a lot of countries will. China has a different voice, for lack of a better term, and they can influence a lot of countries that are in the process of developing. And if the most developed country in the world and another very influential country in the world came together, their message could resonate with everyone. We need a strong U.S.-China relationship, according to this argument, in order to get everyone to sign on to the Paris Accords as it relates to global warming, global climate change. And if the United States and China bicker, it will be very difficult for them to be on the same page to get a variety of different countries who are at different stages of their development process on the same page. Lastly, and this is not in the packet, but I think we'll study it over our course of a few weeks here in East Lansing, the United States and China's relationship is especially important for the United States' relationship to North Korea. If North Korea had a Facebook page, they would either have 0 Facebook friends or 1, okay? It's unclear to me, all right? And the 1 might be China. North Korea is overwhelmingly isolated from the rest of the world. But they kind of talk with China, etc. So a lot of people say a good U.S.-China relationship is important for the United States' agenda as it relates to Kim Jong-un, who you've maybe read about, definitely does some weird stuff and says that, you know, he shot like a hole-in-one on every chord. He's just an interesting, weird character. All right? And so, you know, if you're worried about North Korea, do you really want to alienate China, who might be our best in, with North Korea? Okay. That is a very preliminary introduction to the packet. I'm going to stick around here for the next few minutes and allow people to ask individualized questions. Right now, I want to give you a little bit of extra time so that you can get back to the dorm. There's nothing going on in your lab this afternoon that's so busy that you shouldn't eat lunch, but it takes a little while to transition over there. Let me close with one thing. I threw a lot at you today, all right? And that's okay. It's day 1 of camp and it's confusing. If any of this confuses you, talk to your instructors or feel free to pose questions to me. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.